This yellow packet in my hand looks ordinary, but today it feels heavy because the place where this biscuit was first baked almost 100 years ago has been demolished, and the original factory of ParleG in Vile Parle, Mumbai is no longer standing. But the biscuit is still alive in every Indian home, and the contrast is exactly why this story matters. Pause and look at this packet, because this is not just a food. It is not just a brand, and for millions of us, this is a childhood wrapped in plastic. But here is something surprising. Most people never think about this question, which is why did ParleG even exist in the first place, and why did India need its own biscuit? Because once upon a time, biscuits were not Indian at all, and they were British imports, and they were expensive, and they were treated as luxury items. And for normal middle class family, biscuits were not daily snacks, but rare treats. Tea was common, but biscuits with tea were not, and that gap changed every day. A young entrepreneur named Mohanlal Dayal Chauhan saw this gap, and instead of thinking how to sell something premium, he asked a very simple question, which was, why can't every Indian child afford a biscuit? And that one question built one of India's biggest food companies. In 1929, he started a small unit with just a handful of workers and basic ovens, and that small setup later became Parle Products. And there were no fancy machines and no big investors, and just belief and hard work. At first, they made candies and toffees and slowly learned manufacturing. And then came the big experiment, which was a glucose biscuit that was cheap filling and perfect for Indian families. And they named it Parle Gluco. It was simple and affordable and reliable. And slowly it started entering the homes across Mumbai and then across India. But then something interesting happened, and many companies started copying the word Gluco, and suddenly the shop had multiple Gluco biscuits, and the customers got confused, and Parle realized that if they wanted to stay different, they need a strong identity, and so Parle Gluco became ParleG. From that moment, the ParleG era truly began. People stopped asking for glucose biscuits and started asking for G-Wala biscuit. That's how real brands are born in India, through people, not marketing. And slowly, without drama and without big celebrity arts, ParleG entered everyday life. And this is where the story becomes emotional, because this biscuit did not grow through aspiration, but through presence. Morning chai had ParleG, school tiffins had ParleG, train journeys had ParleG, hostel rooms had ParleG. When money was tight, ParleG was enough. And when guests arrived suddenly, ParleG was served. And when kids were sick, ParleG with milk felt comforting. It quietly became default. Think about your own childhood for a second and remember the yellow packet and the small girl's face and the crinkle sound when you open it, and the way biscuits soften inside the chai and break sometimes. And you have tried again, and somehow every Indian remembers this exact same moment. Different states and different languages, but the same memory. That is not advertising, that's a culture. And all of this began in that first factory in Vile Parle, where ovens started before the sunrise and workers packed biscuits by hand. Locals say the whole area smelled like fresh baking every morning. And imagine waking up daily to the smell of biscuits, because that building was not just a factory, and it was part of neighborhood's life. That place gave birth to one of India's most trusted foods. Now here comes the scale. And this is where the story becomes unbelievable, because this tiny biscuit from one small factory today produced across multiple modern plants in India at a scale that is hard to imagine. Across Parle factories, around 400 million ParleG biscuits are baked every single day, which means crores of biscuits every day reaching almost every town and village in the country. 400 million biscuits daily from something that started with a few ovens. And financially, the company is equally massive, because Parle Products today records around 15 to 16,000 crore rupees in annual turnover. And that makes it one of India's most and largest food businesses, and ParleG alone contributes thousands of crores to that numbers. A biscuit that costs just a few rupees has built multi-billion rupee enterprise, and that is the power of scale plus trust. The company exports to more than 100 countries and supports tens of thousands of workers directly and indirectly. From a 12% setup, it became a nationwide operation. And yet the product in your hand still looks exactly the same, and that consistency is the secret. Same taste and same price logic, and same familiarity for the decades. But now let's come back to where we started. Because recently the original factory building was demolished and the production had already moved years ago to bigger and more efficient plants. So ParleG is not stopping, and in fact it is stronger than ever. But still, when the birthplace disappears, it feels emotional because we are not losing production, we are losing a piece of history. That factory was like an old school or an old cinema or an old house where you grew up, and even if you don't live there anymore, you still feel attached. And that is what Vile Parle's first Parle factory was for Mumbai and for India. It stood there quietly for almost a century, telling the story of how Indian businesses replaced imports and built something for their own. And maybe this is the biggest lesson from ParleG, which is that you don't always need to be premium to win. You don't need fancy branding to matter. And sometimes the most powerful strategy is simply being affordable, available, and consistent. This is not just business, and that is understanding people. Today, modern factories continue baking millions of packets every hour, and children are still dipping ParleG into chai. Parents are still putting it into the lunch boxes, and travelers are still buying it at the railway stalls. And the story continues even though the first bowls are gone. Buildings disappear, but habits remain and memories remain. So, when you look at this small yellow packet next time, remember that it traveled from the British luxury biscuits we could not afford to an Indian biscuit everyone could buy, and from Parle Gluco to ParleG, and from one small factory to 40 crore biscuits a day, and from a product to an emotion. Some brands sell snacks and some brands become part of our lives, and ParleG quietly become both. If this story brought back even one memory from your childhood, then stay around and subscribe.